Hey guys, it's Retro Gaming now, and I'm back with Mist Uru Complete Chronicles. So we have to read a bunch of journals that we found in Dunny from the linking stone over here, but while I was I headed back to Relta for a minute, I was coming back, and it was nighttime at Gira, and I actually think this is really cool. It's a sort of... I like the atmosphere a lot better than the atmosphere of daytime. Like, it feels really peaceful, sort of just here with the moon, two moons and stuff. You can see there's birds flying around. We can look out into the distance over there. There's actually a fish swimming around in this thing. Let's see if I can find him. There he is. It's like a stingray thing. So anyway, that's really cool. I'd forgotten that this age actually goes to nighttime, so I just thought I'd point that out. I think it's a pretty cool really cool environment. I just like the feel of it. So now we're going to head back to Dunny using a linking stone, and we've got our 13 journals to read, or something like that, so let's get it done. Alright, before we begin, I'm just going to be honest, this is an episode where if you don't really care about Dunny at all, you might want to skip it, because we're not going to learn a ton of stuff that's especially pertinent to the story. It's more to the backstory, sort of how did the Dunny get here? What were the Dunny like? What sort of is this place here? So we're just going to go in a circle, I think. And we're going to start back here. That's kind of funny. Pseudo. It's a little reference to Siam. Meade, Washington. Alright. So, let's get started. King Showat. Showat took the throne in the year 300 DE, Dunny era, at the age of 44. Up to the point of his coronation, he'd been a member of the Guild of Writers. He continued his study of the art through the private mentors for a number of years after his coronation. It was the lack of proper guild instruction that most Dunny historians attribute to the distorted views Showat later took on. It was an up-and-down reign, partly due to the tremendous tension that seemed to exist between himself and his older brothers. Both of the brothers, though they had little respect, did everything in their power to make Showat's reign tumultuous. One of the first actions Showat ordered was the construction of a palace. When it was completed in 347 DE, Showat moved in with his family, although his brothers refused, and maintained their own homes. Such an act was regarded as a tremendous disrespect to a family, and only served to widen the gap between Showat and his brothers, furthering tensions not only within Showat's family, but within the culture as well as the lavishness of the place. Ornate gardens were present inside the physical grounds, and garden ages were written as well, linking from within the palace. Rumors abounded that some of these garden ages were even wiped of their inhabitants in order to provide Showat with relaxation. Whether true or not, Showat often spoke publicly to the need of the ages to serve the Dunny. This was the first for the society, and a direct contradiction to what the guilds taught. The Dunny were to serve the ages. It seems that eventually the tension became too much. Some say it drove Showat mad. In 347 DE, both his brothers disappeared and were never found again. It is commonly presumed that Showat wrote a death book in which both of his brothers were linked into, although it could never be proven. Regardless, it was one of the first major challenges for the people of Dunny, and they reacted quickly. A prophetess was supplied to Showat in 400 DE as an attempt to guide him to the ways of Yahweh. For the 155 remaining years of his reign, it seems that most people believe Showat became a better king. The prophetess became an excellent mentor for Showat and eventually convinced him to choose the son of one of his close friends as the heir to the throne. His own children were admittedly out of control. As it turns out, it was the bloodline of that child that led to the birth of the great king years later. Showat died of natural causes at 229. So some notes. The women were generally seen as much better communicators with the Yahweh than men. As a result, the most prophets were women. The choosing of prophetesses as guides for the king started with Showat and became tradition for all the remaining kings of Dunny. It was usually up to the king as to which prophet or prophetess he would seek for wisdom. Alright, there's one of them. That's a different handwriting we've never seen. Pseudo composition. Stone hammers. Band. King Demath took the throne at 4692 DE at the age of 154. Though the public was generally not happy with the reign of G, it appears as though they were pleased with his choice of Demath to succeed him. Demath had joined the Guild of Maintainers at the age of 5, as most did, and risen to the level of Guildmaster by the time he was chosen as king. The selection was a surprise to much of the public, and apparently even to Demath himself. It was not a post he had especially desired to have. Almost immediately, Demath ordered a ban on all unnecessary links to be enforced by the Maintainers, while the council carried out emergency meetings trying to decide their stance on the outsiders. In these meetings, the council concluded that the relations with the outsiders would continue, but with much stricter restrictions and guidelines. The list was long that Demath signed into law and included the restriction of any outsiders operating dunny machinery or linking books. Perhaps more importantly, the council and the king sent a clear message to all of the factions who were against the outsider involvement with dunny. Their ideas would not be tolerated if they led to any infraction of the rules previously established by Loshamenth, which were to become strictly enforced. And though it was not stated publicly, the Realamenth, meaning the unseen, was apparently ordered to double its membership and find any and all who were carrying out illegal activities with the outsiders. As well, Demath denounced the words of the Watcher as pure rubbish and nothing more than a desperately lonely man seeking attention. In 4721 DE, Demath pushed in an amendment that forced the major guilds to accept a percentage of students who passed all entrance exams but could not afford the steep prices. It was the first such action in the history of dunny, and one that many seemed to question, especially the guilds themselves. However, Demath was able to convince them that it was a necessity for the society, and the one which they cautiously agreed. In 4724, records point to over 10 separate groups being convinced of the Loshamenth laws, as they'd become to be called. The most agreed that Realamenth played a large role in the convictions, although there are no official records of their involvement. Regardless, each convicted was sentenced to solitary confinement on prison ages. The convictions must have carried a powerful impact on the society, as the public still knew very little of Realamenth, if anything at all, and thus had no idea how many convictions were occurring. As one writer said, there were stories of dark shadows and mysterious creatures. For those carrying out such activities, it was said that the eyes of Demath saw everything, while his arms took anyone he wanted. The crime rate, especially pertaining to the Loshamenth laws, steadily lowered until 4752, when there were only 3 recorded convictions. In 4784 DE, an assassination attempt was carried out against Demath, resulting in the death of 2 members of the Realamenth, who saved Demath's life in the process. The perpetrators were found, and 2 years later, Demath ordered their execution. It was the first execution of its kind and met with little resistance from the public or the council. The 2 men were apparently linked to a death age, permanently ending their lives. The most agreed with the execution, those who were against outsider involvement to begin with, now felt even stronger in their case. Now they argued, dunny is killing itself for the sake of the outsiders. In 4826, Demath was rewarded for his efforts pertaining to the acceptance policies of major guilds. The first of the Guild of Stonemasons non-paying members headed the effort to devise early fusion compounding technology, a building block for the eventual development of Nera. Demath praised the guild and the numerous opportunities that all citizens of dunny now had to benefit their society. In 4843, at the age of 305, Demath passed away, leaving the throne to his firstborn son. Some notes. Some argued that G didn't make the choice of Demath, but the Grand Master of the Guild Maintainers made it. The matter was never officially settled, although most contribute the choice to G. From Demath's speech explaining to the people the feelings of the council meetings. By that time, the major guilds had become extremely expensive, and a large majority of the population, even if qualified to join the guilds, had no way to afford it. Taken from the private journals of the Guild Master Rishan and the Guild of Archivists, from Revealing the Unseen, written by Bisharin in 5999, Goshen, leader of the cult group of the Blood, Yavo, who made a comment in a public speech. The comments were made by Demath at the public announcement of the fusion compounding technology. Alright. King Rener. Sam rules. So it's probably Sam is writing this, because we haven't seen this handwriting before. King Rener. Rener was born in 207 BE before Earth on Gartnane. He was accepted in the Guild of Writers at the age of 5, a standard age, and as the years progressed, quickly became one of the finest writers that Ronway had ever seen. Certain records go as far as stating that Rener was unsurpassed in skill by any other writer of the day. By the time he was 90, Rener achieve the rank of guild master and well on his way to become the Grand Master. However, due to personal convictions, he never achieved that rank. Rener had long been a challenger to the views of the Guild of Writers, as well as the king himself. Rener was apparently very concerned with the society's views pertaining to the purpose of writing and the challenge of acting, responsibly with the great gift given to us by the Yavo. Around 73 BE, Rener was asked by the Grandmaster to write a descriptive book to a questionable age, at least in the eyes of Rener himself. He perceived the age as being used to house an uncivilized race and could be used for the purposes of Rener. Thus, Rener refused to carry out the command from his Grandmaster and, after much debating, was apparently dismissed from the Guild of Writers. Some records point to Rener willfully excusing himself from the guild, although regardless of how he left, much of the society found the dismissal unfair, and some even went so far as to call it detrimental to society. Around 59 BE, the fact that Gartenay would not be able to serve the Rhone as a home for being much longer was confirmed, and the information made public. Rener had long known the state of Gartenay, and from the time of his dismissal had apparently been working on an age that he felt would be a good place for those who wished to follow him. According to various journals, Rener managed to attract a few thousand Rhone and convince them to follow him in the ways that he felt important, and to the age that he had written. The king allowed Rener to split away from the Rhone, along with a few other smaller groups, while the majority of Rhone left Gartenay to a new home world called Terre-Ni. Rener took his group to the earth where he established the Dunny, meaning new beginning. Rener was a strong leader, immediately establishing himself as a king and reigning for 120 years until his death. Obviously, those who followed Rener to Dunny are already respected him enough to separate themselves from their family and friends, and thus records point to very few debates or disagreements within the society under the reign of Rener. As always had been the case with Rhone, a group of surveyors was sent to Dunny before the group officially moved there to establish the Great Zero and the line emanating from it. A monument was built on the Great Zero the year 0 DE. Unlike previous occasions, Rener established the line of the Great Zero as set apart for holy buildings. Without the authorization by the reigning king, construction was forbidden. Though it's never stated directly, records strongly imply that it was Rener who chose where the city would be established. He seemed to base his decisions on two factors, which probably made the decision an easy one. First was the line on the Great Zero. It seemed an obvious spot to base the city, with most important religious structures being directly on the line and the rest of the city surrounding its center. The second factor was a group of waterfalls that flowed from the ceiling of the cavern to an area adjacent to the line of the Great Zero. The fresh flowing water was perfect for drinking. A new writers' guild with fairly different rules than the one that existed in Gartenay was constructed almost immediately, 8 DE, under the direction of Rener. By the year 100, Rener had directed to be the recreation of the 18 major guilds. The guilds were dedicated to Yavo, the Day of the Circle, a celebration not only of the completion of the major guilds, but a celebration of the new guilds, which Rener believed were healthier than those that existed in Gartenay. Guilds that have been established to please Yavo and not themselves, Rener said. Certain records point to the guilds on Gartenay becoming extremely competitive with one another and focusing more upon having the best facility than carrying out their duty to Yavo and the people. In an effort to curb that kind of competition, Rener implemented a list of restrictions upon guild construction. The restrictions included guidelines pertaining to placement, facing the Great Zero, size, shape, and minor visual guidelines. Though one of Rener's top priorities was the construction of a temple, there were disagreements as to specifics, causing numerous delays in the finalization of the construction plans. Eventually, construction was started in 48 DE and the temple was completed in 63 DE. Known as the Regeltovorum, the temple to Yavo was meant as a place to worship, as well as a reminder of the promised great king who would come to them soon. Rener also made it a priority to install massive fans that would supply the cavern with fresh air. Natural openings existed, but it was quickly discovered that they did not supply ample circulation for the cavern. As a result, massive shafts and fans were built and installed over a 30-year period between 84 and 114 DE. It should be noted that the numerous records point to a small group of Dunny disappearing upon completion of the fans. It is most often assumed they remained on the surface of Earth to live. Throughout his reign, records point to multiple occasions which Rener refused to build a palace for himself. Instead, he lived in a fairly basic home, similar in fashion to most of his fellow citizens, and made it specifically clear that until Yavo had a new home, he could not allow himself one. Although, even after the temple was completed, Rener refused to build a palace, always focusing more on the religious and government sites. Rener's own philosophy centered on the fact that it was much easier to focus on Yavo and his wishes when circumstances were difficult and struggles more abundant. It was strongly believed that Rener's refusal to build a palace was an expression of that philosophy. In 120 DE, Rener died of apparent heart complications. He was 327 years old. Though he had married, he left no children. As a result, he chose one of his apprentices, named Alish, to succeed him. So there are notes taken from the memoirs of Alish, from the Oath of the New Guild of Writers written by Rener, taken from the journals of the Grandmaster Naan of the Guild of Legislators. Gartenay's sun was dying and would eventually cause a rapid decrease in temperature, making it an uninhabitable age. It's supposed to be uninhabitable, it says inhabitable. The Great Zero itself was usually based on a prominent natural landmark within an age. From the Great Zero, a line was drawn, usually towards magnetic north, to aid in navigation, construction, etc. It should be noted that the 18 major guilds of Dunny were not necessarily the same as the 18 that existed on Gardenay. In fact, they were probably much different. Though there's no information that details the major guilds of Gardenay, we do know that the guilds were meant to be flexible and serve the people and the needs of their time. Taken from the transcript of Rener's speech on the first day of the circle. The prophetical work of the Regavalt of Urpa, there we go. A book Rener believed strongly in, dealt with the numerous prophecies of a great king who would be sent by Yavo to guide the people. There we go. 3 down. Which way are we going to go? Well, we're going to go this way. King Alish, and it's also by Sam, you can see up top. King Alish. Alish took the throne in coronation ceremonies in the year 120 DE at the age of 170. Though it seems Alish had never been a member of the Writers' Guild on Gardenay, he spent his first 50 years of his life with Rener after his own dismissal, working on the Book of Dunny. When the Dunny Writers' Guild was formed in the year 8 DE, Rener made sure Alish was placed in charge as the first Grand Master of the Guild. As Grand Master, he had worked closely with Rener in writing of the new Guild of Writers' Oath. The oath, which was what every member promised to live by, ended up staying in existence with a few minor changes until 9400 DE. Records indicate that Alish modeled his life very closely to Rener's. He refused himself a palace until a common library was open, and strongly supported a place where all citizens could have access to books. Though there was some minor disagreement on minor issues, the building was eventually finished in 223 DE. Although, like his mentor, Alish still refused to build himself a palace. The reign of Alish was extremely similar to that of Rener. There was still great excitement for the new ideals and laws of Dunny, and thus great support for Alish, making his reign a very smooth one. Before his third son was born in 256 DE, records indicate that there was a bit of public apprehension over who the next king would be. Alish's 2 eldest sons were fairly religious, and neither seemed good candidates for the throne, at least in the public's opinion. However, as Alish's third son grew, it became apparent to the public, although records never give specific reasons, that the boy closely followed his father's ideals. Alish must have agreed with the public opinion, as it was his third son who he selected to succeed him. Alish died of natural causes at the age of 350. Another Sam book, King Asimlef. King Asimlef took the throne at 5999 DE at the age of 54. Asimlef inherited people who were philosophically confused, the Watcher versus Gish versus the great King Tavar, but technologically advancing, many great construction, mining, and scientific inventions, expanding within the cavern at a great rate, and moving towards diminishing the involvement of outsiders within their culture. As well, the fighting that had scarred their past was at a minimum. Asimlef continued the peaceful trends by attempting to isolate no one, but instead welcoming everyone, and any beliefs that they might have. It seems that he took no stance on any of the varying religious ideologies being passed around and allowed any and all religious factions equal access to property, government, help, etc. While disregarding no beliefs, he was able to hold his own, some of which were unknown to Dunny up to that point. Though he never stated publicly by Asimlef, a common opinion in historical records points around numerous servants used by Asimlef, most brought from outside ages. More so were the apparent challenges that Asimlef held with these servants. Details are hard to find, but it seems as though the challenges ranged from hunts by Asimlef himself to gladiator-style battles between the servants. It should be noted that regardless of what actions occurred, there's little public outcry against them. Instead of philosophical or religious beliefs, Asim instead focused on mining expansion, construction of new districts, offering equal opportunities of culture and societal benefits to all classes. As far as outside involvement, Asim publicly argued that the order from his father to all the guilds was not realistic, and that outside involvement would always be needed to some extent. Knowing that the comment would anger some of the factions, he became the first king to publicly invite the more extreme factions who wanted no outside involvement to his palace for numerous talks on the issue. Though no decisions were made in the meetings, the meetings themselves apparently calmed the factions and created a better overall feeling that the two could come to decisions in the future. Around the same time, 2 key writers from the Writers Guild left to join the Writers of Yavo. Up to that point, the group who believed it was their duty to write the perfect age had been relatively small. Like the Writers of Yavo, most of the popular factions of cults of the day focused on Yavo in one way or another. The old cults, such as the Tree and Sacred Stone, had vanished for the most part, but were leaving the way to disagreements in the beliefs of Yavo for the most part. Asim passed away in 6284 DE at the age of 339, leaving the throne to his third and youngest son. So it's from the line of Keth, written by Fal in 6985. Worth mentioning is the Writers of Yavo would eventually become one of the 3 largest sects in all of Dunny. And after the Judgment Age, most of Dunny believed one would either end up in the Perfect Age or Jakuth's Age. Obviously, most wanted to live in the Perfect Age, but there were, of course, a variety of beliefs on how that was accomplished. So basically just religious issues in general. Alright, King Majan. Sam also wrote this. King Najan took the throne in 2356 DE at the age of 86. Najan did much to encourage the growth of the major guild of fine artists, as well as seeking of the other truths. The year 2500 DE, 1,000 years after the death of the great king, would mark the peak of what some would call the religious confusion. There were over... let me start that over. The year 2500 DE, 1,000 years after the death of the great king, would mark the peak of what some would call the religious confusion. There were over 2,000 registered sects, and the original beliefs of Rener were known by very few. Najan was clearly not one of them. As 2937 DE, it is 2937 DE that most officially marks the start of Dunny Renaissance. In that year, the Amos Theatre Company hosted the first play written by the playwright Sireh. The play dealt with the Pinto War and the great king himself, and was one which Najan praised. It ended up being sold out for 3 straight weeks, and marked not only the start of theater as a popular entertainment source within the culture, but also the beginning of the Pinto War subject, which would go on to become one of the most dealt with topics in the history of their art. In 2408, the 33-year-old musician Aram began selling out concert halls, marking the beginning of yet another career of one of his great Dunny artists. His music also dealt with much of the great king, many times ridiculing him. Najan praised his people for being able to express their true feelings in such wonderful displays of art. In 2488 DE, the first successful extrusion tests were carried out by the Guild of Miners, and also to great applause from the public. Najan used the occasion to benefit everyone. He appointed the Guild of Miners as a major guild, replacing the Guild of Fine Artists. He then split the Guild of Fine Artists into 2 minor guilds of sculptors, artists, actors, and musicians. The split was to encourage the growth in mining as well as the arts, the 2 major causes of Najan throughout his reign. His proposal was strongly supported by Sireh and Aram, as well as the other artists, who viewed it as an excellent opportunity for the growth of their respective fields. In 2500 DE, Najan proposed the construction of a new council chamber for the guilds. Somewhat surprising was they suggested it be built over the tomb of the great king. The proposal was met with little opposition, and construction began 2 years later. In 2502 DE, the tomb of the great king was barely visible, as a tremendous symbol of what Dunny had become. Later it was discovered that, within the council chamber, was a massive wall, protected by puzzles of a sort. The dome had always been known for its patterns, some of which were claimed to have prophetic messages. Najan apparently became enamored with the patterns and spread them throughout the unseen portions of the chamber as well as the scene. Though the public knew very little of the vault at the time, of construction, years later was found to contain a tremendous amount of royal wealth, something Nagin often publicly encouraged. Of course, most were not able to save the amounts. Nagin did, but still the idea of saving one's money for future generations was strongly encouraged by him. Nagin died in 2533 DE at the age of 263, leaving the throne to his third son. In memorial to Nagin, Cyril wrote another of the more popular plays entitled Our Great King. It was the first play performed by the Minor Guild of Actors in 2535 DE. Taken from the Journal of Tevar in 375, from a speech by Nagin christening the Minor Guild of Musicians. Though the official church registered a complaint, it seemed there was little heart behind it. Apparently even a prophetess of Nagin supported the proposition. Which is... building a thing over the tomb. Alright, almost halfway done. I hate reading, so here we've got something else. DRC. Matthew, the last batch of papers you sent were very interesting. Since you did a good job, I've got another list I'd like you to divvy up to the team. How you do it is up to you. Number 1, I'd like some information on family life, ceremonies, etc. Anything related to birth, marriage, cultural events. I know we have quite a bit of source material for this, so anything you get would be helpful. I think we've gathered quite a bit on science and technology, not enough on the personal lives of these people. Number 2, we have quite a build of guild information, but gathering that up into one tiny little area would be nice. Number 3, the fall is still an obvious area where we are lacking. I'm not sure I can help you with the research material, but given the latest information we are getting, at some time we're going to have to dig into this. That's a pun. I recommend assigning someone who has the sole task of the fall. Number 4, continue on with the kings. A short synopsis of all the kings would be helpful, following the form you started with the last batch. Number 5, we still have religious writings we need to translate. These are going to be the most difficult, but I think they can give us large amounts of helpful information. Number 6, we have a stack of journals from various Dunny residences, etc., not to mention the ages. I think that will be more than enough for now. Again, thank your team and tell them they're doing great work. Dr. Watson. Sack lunch, typewriter. Where the heck is my book, and why did someone take it in the first place? Said Nick. So, looks like there's one book, at least one journal that we can't access right now. King Keth. King Keth took the throne in 6731 DE at the age of 54. Keth is probably the most well-known name of all the kings, not because he was necessarily considered the best, but because he was the last. His name came to represent all the kings in the later years, including the remaining of the Arch of Kings to the Arch of Keth. His mother had raised him to follow the teachings of Jish, and by the time he took the throne he believed to be a wholehearted believer in the followers. Because of that and the experience of watching his father interact with his advisors, Keth had decided from an early age that a king was no longer the correct way the Dunny should be led. At least he argued not until the true great king would come. The fact that Keth, in a single reign, was able to convince his people that the way they'd been ruled for thousands of years was wrong and should be changed should be considered nothing short of miraculous. Keth carefully crafted his arguments as a benefit for the guilds more than anything else. After all, he argued, Dunny is the guilds, let us be protected by their fortress and ruled by their wisdom. It was hard for the guilds not to support a proposal that removed the king from the highest authority and replaced him with 5 lords that would automatically be chosen from the Grand Masters of the guilds. It gave all the power of Dunny to the guilds, and thus were only a few Grand Masters that seemed to disagree. The few were known as faithful followers of the great king, and Rener, who had always supported the role of kings. Fortunately for Keth, those people believed in a variety of different philosophical ideologies. Only those who faithfully followed the original teachings of Rener and the great king were disturbed at the thought of no king. And it was the majority of Dunny who no longer followed those beliefs, but instead of Nema, Gish, the Watchers, and various others. As a result, it was a cultural impact that the public had to overcome and not a religious one. Keth, attempting to further please the guilds, recommended new renovations and additions to the council chamber and the construction of a new guild hall, meant to celebrate the new power that would be theirs. Wrong, bad grammar again. A symbol of the new power of the guilds and lords, and further insult to the great king, bearing his memory even further under government construction. Construction began in 6970 DE, and the new guild on the new guild hall. There was no better symbol of the attitude of the Dunny in 6970 DE. The tomb of the great king was further buried under the massive buildings dedicated to government and the guilds. By the end of his reign, Keth had convinced a majority of Dunny that of his own beliefs. Most claimed to be followers of Gish, and it was his writings that most viewed outsiders as a threat. If not now, then soon, Keth often said. After his death, Keth's words would be proven with the onset of the Miss D War. Outside factions invaded with attempts to destroy the ink-making and bookmaking guilds, and almost succeeded. By the time of the war would end, there would be few left who did not follow Gish, and thus believe in the end of the most outsider involvement. The discovery of conservative factions that led to the start of the Medis War would come much later, when it was far too late to alter the conservative trends. Regardless, in 6977 DE, Keth abdicated the throne and gave over the power to the kings of the first kings to the first 5 lords of Dunny history. There were Lord Terry and the Guild of Messengers, Lord Hemla of the Guild of Healers, Lord Moleth of the Guild of Caterers, Lord Kedri of the Guild of Riders, and Lord Coronin of the Guild of Analysts. Keth died 8 years later. The time of kings was over. So it's taken from Keth's public speech in which he proposed the idea, and from the first 5 written by Tarvis in 7000. All right. It's draining. The King Miman. King Miman took the throne at 5240 DE at the age of 83. One of the biggest announcements of Miman's reign came rather quickly and was offered by the Guild of Miners and Stonemasons, who had worked together. In 5307, they revealed Nera, as had been created in the laboratory weeks earlier. Nera offered tremendous opportunities for mining construction and ended up having a massive impact on future opportunities for the Dunny. Even at the time of its release, there was apparently much excitement about its potential. In 5312 DE, disease broke out in the industrial district of Dunny, most likely originating from the age of Yasefe. The outbreak caused widespread panic, and many predicted the plague, similar to what happened during the 2100s. Fortunately, the illness was not nearly as lethal as the aforementioned, and the Guild of Healers reacted extraordinarily fast in finding the cure. Regardless, there was again a new push to separate the New Hyrule district away from the city proper. So I'm going to go look these up real quick, because these are somewhat important. So, Nera is a metallic gray stone, 30 times the density of steel and the hardest of all Dunny stones. Yasefe was mostly forest and provided Dunny with a good portion of its word supply, including the expensive and rare Yima. And the industrial district was formed during the reign of Nidra and served as importation center for the most outside goods. Alright. Miman apparently liked the idea quite a bit and encouraged the surveyors to begin looking for an expansion. Into such an expansion. In 5359 DE, the Dunny received another great reason to begin major expansion. It came in the form of Stone Tooth. It was the second of the Great Diggers, and quite a bit more powerful and technologically advanced than the older Stone Eater. Miman immediately ordered the Guild of Miners to begin clearing an area, along with Stone Eater, for a new industrial district replacing New Hyrule. It was not until 5475 DE that actual construction was begun on the new industrial section, Uran. Less than 100 years after Stone Tooth, in 5473 DE, the Guild of Maintainers announced that the newly constructed Dorenthi could be used, or newly discovered Dorenthi could be used to create much improved and much more protective maintainer suits. Though such an announcement may not seem especially important, the new suits ended up having great impact on Dunny culture. Since the maintainers were able to take bigger risks with the type of ages they could explore, the Guild of Riders were allowed to be a bit more liberal in their writing, and a new breed of age was begun. The newer ages allowed for much more experimentation with atmospheres, animal life, and energy sources. During Miman's reign, words had become a common topic of discussion, and attention was again given to older temples. Evidence points to numerous remodels and renovations of many of the secular temples that had been built on the new line of Great Zero. Years earlier, on the new line of Great Zero. It seems that Miman himself paid little attention to the religious pulse of his people, being much more interested in the technological advancements and city expansion to care. Once Miman felt that Stone Eater and Stone Tooth were no longer needed, he recommended using them to build an underground tunnel connecting the island to the city proper, and minimizing the need for boat travel. His proposition was not embraced by any means, especially by the upper classes who were living on the island. Apparently there were a number of protests for fear of the effect the tunnel could have on the island with the wrong effect. The proposal was also rejected by most of the guilds, causing Miman not to force it. In 5500 DE, the first imports from other ages were linked to the new Uran district, much further from the city. Uran was said to be a tremendous improvement of the older Nuhuerl, much more advanced, much safer, and there was tremendous celebration on the day of its opening. Alright, these we don't need to care about that. Security was tight in the new district, as it was revealed later that Relema discovered a variety of plots intended to display some of the factions' disagreements with the district. Should be faction apostrophe, whatever. In 5540 DE, Miman's only son became extremely ill and ended up passing away 6 months later. As a member of the Guild of Healers, Asim was often among the first to investigate new ages to make sure their safety in relation to disease. As a result of his death, the age was not approved until a cure could be found. Miman considered the actions of his son heroic and changed the name of Uran district to Asim a year after his death. Ashimin. It was said that the death left Miman deeply saddened and devoid of the excitement he had shown throughout his reign. Many said it forced him to the prophetess Tisari. Miman apparently spent much time with Tisari in his last days and was able to die a content man because of her. Miman died in 5549 at the very ripe age of 392 and chose his nephew, probably in the recommendation of Tisari, to succeed him. From the Journal of Grandmaster Vishard, the Guild of Stone Miners, from the Journal of Prophetess Tisari, assigned to King Miman. It should be noted that prophetesses had been assigned to all of the kings, but for the most part had become nothing more than figureheads, rarely consulted. From Ashton, written by Rener. Alright. Moving along. We got this thing here. Check this out. I know the DRC doesn't want us to touch these, but I bet Watson would like to know how they register with the doors too. It makes no sense. And don't lose it. I could barely get it off the wall, and when I did, it was pretty scary. Maybe the weirdest thing is that when I went back later, the cloth I got this piece from was intact again. Says Nick. So that's a journey cloth. Obviously, the DRC knows about them if they don't want them to touch them. And let's see what we've got here. Class system, Trisha. Class structure. Seems as though my first inclination towards class structure was incorrect. Though early on there was little in the way of a class society, such a high ideal faded quickly. By 9400 DE there were 7 very distinct classes. Elite. The Lords and the Grand Masters of the major guild. It was possible for private citizens to be accepted, but if so, abundant resources were needed. It was only the elite who owned private libraries of books and the private islands. Quite a few obvious attempts to reach out and unify the classes, although I'm not sure it did much good. Common libraries, major guild scholarships, renovations of poor districts all seemed more political than life-changing. Not surprising, I suppose. Guild members. Yes, it was possible for the lower classes to attend, but it seemed by the end the schools were far too expensive and prestigious to allow for such. As a result, the graduates became a class among themselves, and a very high one at that. Upper class. The lowest of the 3 higher classes. Such citizens had succeeded in private enterprise and most likely provide the elite with their banks, pubs, etc. No major guild education for the most part, but enough money to buy their way into the upper classes. Number 4. Middle class. Most shop owners and the like. Able to afford some luxuries of dunny, but still considered far from the elite. Rare, but possible for them to own books as well as private ages. Seem to make up most of the minor guild enrollment. High poor. The higher class of poor seem to be made mostly of industrial workers, many of whom spent their time on foreign ages, before it was outlawed, of course. It seems as though this class, along with the lower 2, did not own books. Low poor. I can't seem to find a better name for them. However, it seems as though there were 2 classes of poor. These low poor were relegated to their own districts and rarely even seen within the middle class, and never the upper class. Possibly used as servants, although that was generally looked down upon. Sublow? Reference to the least, an undefined subclass, are found on rare occasions. Not enough data to elucidate. Alright. Pregnancy. Now this is surprising, I can't say for sure, but it seems fairly clear that dunny women were only fertile for 1 dunny day every 2 dunny months. In surface terms, that's roughly 30 hours every 72 days. If true, it explains quite a few things. First, why there were so few children for people who lived 300 years, and second, the reason behind the rather large celebrations of pregnancy. As far as I can tell, these celebrations were usually limited to family members, although were rather large. There's quite a bit of prayer to Yahweh as well as the blessings from the family members. These blessings usually included vows to care for the pregnant woman and a child in the coming months. As I've mentioned in other areas, pregnant women were believed to be much more insightful, and as a result, part of the pregnancy experience, although not part of the official ceremony, was using that insight to gain revelation from Yahweh. Though there is quite a bit of religious meditation expected of women during this time, I won't go into it here. However, this meditation was expected to primarily guide the woman to her child's future, and purpose was taken rather seriously. While pregnancy within marriage was a cause for great celebration, the same cannot be said of pregnancy outside of marriage. As far as I can tell, any woman who became pregnant was expected to immediately marry, and any child conceived out of wedlock was unable to join a guild for its entire life. As well, no revelation was expected from such a mother. This was as equivalent to curse to a lower class woman, as her child would not be able to attend a guild of the upper class. As far as I can see, gestation was a full year, 10 dunny months, 290 dunny days, equivalent to 1 earth year. I found no records of multiple births. Maturity, and Michelle wrote this one. Maturity. Similar to a variety of other cultures, the Dunny celebrated a child's entrance into reason and maturity. The Dunny believed that true maturity, or the age of reason as they called it, was achieved at the age of 25. Before that, Dunny believed that children's minds and hearts were not properly formed. Up until that time, they even went so far as to say it was impossible for a child to truly make a correct decision, as they were too easily controlled by other motives. That did not mean that what they did was not right or wrong, but the Dunny believed that Yahweh did not hold them accountable for these decisions. Up to that point, it was apparently up to the parents to judge and protect, and thus, another reason society encouraged couples to only have one child at a time under 25. In the ceremony of readiness, Dunny celebrated a child's entrance into reason and maturity. At the ceremony, the child was presented with a bracelet of knowledge, also translated maturity. I have to admit the translation is somewhat poor and makes it sound like a magical or superstitious item, something it did not sound like to them. In fact, it was a fairly serious item. The Dunny viewed the bracelet as a sign of accountability. The individual, once given the bracelet, was expected to be responsible for his or her actions, as he or she had true knowledge of good and evil, and the wisdom to make the right choices between both. Associated with the bracelet were certain rights as well, as expectations to behave in a more correct manner. From a religious standpoint, the ceremony of readiness signaled the accountability to Yahweh as well as fellow Dunny citizens. No longer were parents judged for their actions of the children on a religious level, and no longer was lack of knowledge an excuse to Yahweh. The Maker, they believe, now expected much more from them. So we're just going to point out Yahweh is now confirmed as the Maker, which we haven't mentioned yet. Though the age of reason was 25, the Dunny did not consider true wisdom to come until much later. While not nearly fanfare that the age of reason brought, at 125 years of age there was another celebration for reaching the age of wisdom. Perhaps most importantly regarding that status, the Dunny were allowed to become the highest ranks of the teachers or leaders, grandmasters or lords. The same rules applied to women, and no woman under the age of 125 was technically allowed to advise, especially the kings. As well, it appears that a woman's fertility ended around age 125. During the time of the kings, advisors were required for those kings who were under the age of 125, as the king himself had not achieved the age of wisdom. The great king Alexander was the only king that did not have an official advisor, though he was under the age of wisdom for the majority of his reign. Alright, one more. I think. Did we already get these? Yes, we did. Alright, let's finish it off with The Manhole. It's a game that Cyan made in the 1980s, late 1980s. It was one of the first CD-ROM games. It may have actually been the very first CD-ROM game. And this one is entitled Marriage by Michelle. Alright, marriage. Much more than modern cultures, within Dunny culture all citizens were expected to marry. In fact, it was even believed that marriage was an important part of a relationship with Yahweh, as it taught and revealed the necessary requirements for such a relationship. Both marriage relationships and the relationship with Yahweh are described as with the same Dunny word, toigyan. Literally translated, the word means to love with the mind, and implied a deep understanding, respect, and most importantly, unselfish love for one another. Obviously, the religious influence on most of the Dunny culture was very strong, and as a result, marriage was not something to be taken lightly. It was considered a lifetime commitment, and for a Dunny who could live to be 300 years old, it was obviously not a decision the Dunny felt should be rushed, and it seems as though it rarely was. Some records point to rare arranged marriages, although for the most part it seems that the decision was up to individuals. Marriage was not permitted before the age of 25, and a marriage between blood relatives was strictly forbidden. Though allowed, marriage between the classes was looked down upon. Marriage to otherworlders was practically unheard of. I found certain writings from the 9000s going as far as to call the mixing of Dunny blood with outside cultures a travesty. Others wrote such a child who marries an outsider was better off dead. The marriage ceremony itself was not a single-day event, but one that took over 5 days. Attendance to these sections of the ceremony attendance to those sections of the ceremony to which one was invited was extremely important, and was considered a disgrace not to be invited and not attend, or to be invited and not attend. The event usually began with a small ceremony held on the evening before the first day of the marriage ceremony. The ceremony always took place at the home of the groom, or his parents, and was meant to confirm both the bride and groom's decision to be united as one in front of their immediate family. The groom presented his bride-to-be with a gift representing the confirmation of his choice. The acceptance of the gift by the bride-to-be was an acknowledgement of her decision. Immediately after acceptance of the gift, the bride-to-be was escorted away with her family and not to be seen by her groom until the joining ceremony that would take place on the 5th day. The first day was meant for the bride and the groom to spend some time with their families. As they were starting their own family, their old family was no longer to be the highest priority. Thus, this day was set aside to spend time with the original family. Traditionally, the day ended with a large meal as well as speeches and blessings from parents to the child. The second day was set aside for the bride and groom to spend with friends, both married and unmarried. Traditionally, one of the friends would host a large dinner at the end of the second day. The third day was reserved for spending time with the soon-to-be in-laws. It was the day that the bride and groom received blessings from their in-laws as well as the other members of the family. Again, there was a traditional larger meal at the end of the day, marked by speeches from the eventual in-laws and other soon-to-be family members. The fourth day was meant for the couple to spend time alone with Yavo individually. Though many apparently viewed the day as a formality, others viewed it as the most significant of the days. The day was often filled with a prayer asking for Yavo's blessing upon the event, as well as time to understand Yavo's desires for their new lives together. It was also considered a time to purify themselves before Yavo. Some chose to spend time with holy priests or prophets, while others read the holy books and talked to Yavo himself. The fifth day was the day of joining. The early portion of the day was set aside for physical preparation, while the later part of the day was set aside for the joining ceremony itself. For those who did not have access to private ages, the ceremony usually took place on marriage ages. For the upper classes, the ceremony took place in a family age. All the families expected to attend, as were fellow guild members. All those in attendance were divided into two sides. One side represented the groom, while the other side represented the bride. Between the two sides, at the center was a long aisle and a triangular podium. The bride and groom would each approach their side of the podium by walking through the respective family and friends. It was, after all, those family and friends who had made the bride and groom what they were, and then Dunny believed it was those family and friends who should present the bride and groom to their spouse. The priestess usually stood on the third side of the podium. As with most important events, and especially marriage, the bride and groom wore the bracelets they had been given at birth as well as at maturity. After the bride and groom arrived to the platform, the father of the bride would remove the bride's bracelets and give them to the groom. The Dunny believed the giving of the bracelets represented the giving of the bride's purity and adulthood to the groom. A short speech followed the event. The father of the groom would follow the father of the bride with the identical procedure, giving his son to the bride. The giving of the children was followed by an expression of both parents of their blessings upon those being joined, as well as those present. Symbolically, the bride and groom then switched sides to represent acceptance of all the brides, family and friends, and the groom of the groom and vice versa. Both the bride and groom handed all 4 bracelets to the priestess. While the priestess led the couple through the commitments to one another in Yavo, the bride and groom placed their hands on the podium. During the commitments, all the couple made promises to another, followed by the promises to Yavo. All were recited out loud and to the priestess. The priestess usually reminded the couple that marriage was a reminder of Tegan, to know with the mind, and that their love should be a representation of their love for Yavo. Following the commitments, the priest would place the 2 new and larger bracelets upon the bride and groom. The groom's was placed upon the left wrist and the bride on the right wrist. The new bracelets were meant to represent the purity and maturity bracelets their spouse had previously worn. The Dunny emphasized that the spouse was now your responsibility to keep pure and knowledgeable of good and evil. The bracelets were meant to be a constant reminder that the responsibility, as well as a commitment to maintain the best for that spouse. After the new bracelets were placed upon the wrist, the hands of the bride and groom were wrapped together with a tight cord, covering the wrist and hands completely. Upon completion, the priest placed a ring upon the pinky of each free hand. The rings were symbolic reminders of the entire ceremony and placed upon the fifth finger to represent the joining that took place on the fifth day. The priest would then usually remove himself from the podium so that the couple could take her place. Together, the couple then walked down the aisle between the two parties and towards the far end of the aisle, where a glass of wine waited for them. Before drinking, the couple knelt and prayed together to Yahweh. After the prayer, they each drank from the cup, and two sides of the hall merged into one group, often with great celebration. They were now considered joined, and the celebration could begin. Families usually fed all in attendance, and there was typically dancing and music. The couple was expected to keep their hands united throughout the entire night as a reminder that they are now joined in both the eyes of man and Yahweh. The binding of the hands was apparently meant to be somewhat troublesome, symbolizing there would be difficult times to their relationship, but those times did not affect the fact they were now joined. Following the celebration, the tradition was for the couple to embrace and the priestess to touch a linking book to them, so they would both link to a vacation or honeymoon time ages. Though these vacations were usually short, it was not unusual for the man to work up to a year in order to build the new marriage. I should also note that the cord used to join the couple's hands together was also viewed as a sacred item. It seems as though various couples use the cord in a variety of different ways, some using them for necklaces and others hanging them in their house. There we go. Mysterium 2000 Frisbee. There we go. That is all the turtles, but there's at least one more that Sam said he had lost. So this was kind of a long episode. I hate doing these, and I don't blame you if you don't like listening to me talk either, because I'm not a very good reader. But yeah, this has been Retro Gaming Now, playing Mr. Uru Complete Chronicles. And that was just a ton of journals that we just read about Dunny history and stuff like that. So, I'm going to point out really quick, you can actually see the Great Arch of Keth out in the back over there. And we read about King Keth, so now I sort of know where that comes from. See if there's anything back here. Nope. Alright, so it's been Retro Gaming Now. We're actually going to do something in the next episode, so see you later.